Good morning, everybody. Morning, morning, morning. Well done for being here on early on a Sunday morning. Hope you had a good dance last night. There was a lot of action on the dance floor. So just a couple of announcements before we kick off with our first demonstration. One, please, I know the weather is a bit inclement today, but please do visit the firers down on the front, because they're like, please promote us, because they're not getting enough people down there, and they've got some lovely things. And Jane will be doing her last Upvara firing today between 11:30 and 1, so if you haven't had a chance to see that or view that, that's your last chance to do it. Other things just to be mindful of, because I've been caught out by this before, the demonstrators exhibition will be closing at 4 o'clock today, and all sales will be ended by then, so if you've got your eye on something, get it before then. And if you can make sure you vote for the emerging makers as well as the short films, but the emerging makers, if you could please cast your vote, because it does really matter, and you can do that at reception. There's an iPad there to do it, or you can do it at the exhibition in the International Politics Building. So I think that's all my housekeeping announcements. So over to our two demonstrators of this session, and we'll just ask them first of all what they're going to do in the next 45 minutes. So Louise?
Hi. Right, I'm going to do some making of what will be a lion on a stand. Much of it is pre-made because of the time constraints, and I want to really concentrate on decorative techniques. So I will be decorating this antita that I demonstrated yesterday, and doing slip decoration using a Sprig mould, and something else that's gone right out of my head right now.
It'll come back. Lovely, thanks very much. And Nick, what are you going to be showing us today?
Hi, good morning. I'm going to be doing a sort of slower Sunday morning demonstration, not driven by a machine today. And I'm going to be making or carving porcelain into one of the components of these flux works that I make. There's one example in the exhibition, and you may have seen, if you saw my talk yesterday, you've seen me talk about these in some photographs. So I'm going to be trying to go from a handmade sphere of porcelain as far as I can towards a kind of carved porcelain form, and maybe talking to you a bit about how the other component of this is made and the process of how it's made.
Fantastic.
So I'm just sitting whittling porcelain, but, you know, can chat at the same time. Chat and whittle.
Do feel free to ask questions throughout, and just give us the opportunity to repeat the question so everybody in the audience can hear it. And also, just if you could ensure that your phones are on silent or airplane mode, that would be great. Good. Here we go.
Okay. So I'm just going to explain briefly what I'm doing to start off with. So
I'd like to ask you how you make the ball to start with.
To make the ball to start with, well, here's one I've half made.
I did earlier.
And it's sort of, you know, if you pat a ball of porcelain into a sphere before you throw it, and then if you keep on doing that and just leaving it sat somewhere and then picking it up every now and then and seeing how well you can pat it into a perfect sphere as it becomes leather hard. And then I've just done that with a surform to get it as round as I can. So there's probably like sensible mechanical ways of making something spherical, but I quite like the sort of awkwardness of just doing it by hand. So I'm going to carve it. This is a sort of half-carved piece, so I'm going to carve it into a sort of version of something like that, but with a twist in it. And the first thing is to kind of mark up my carving lines. So I'm literally getting it set in a lid of a Marmite pot, because I'm very fond of Marmite, and marking the poles on that, so I've got two ends. And then I'll be using a protractor to get the intervals and drawing lines on it to give myself a starting point to carve. And then I'll just sit there and carve away.
This is quite a contrast to the machine.
Yeah.
So it's all this is drawn out by eye.
Yeah, it's all again all done by eye really, except for not like with the lathe work, not much measuring.
Okay, there's a request for a split screen if possible. We do get requests not to have split screen as well. Yes, a lot. Yeah, because people find it too small to see the detail. So, sorry, you prefer the single screen? Yeah, it's a 50-50. Yeah, we've trialled it over many years, and we have an absolute hung jury on this one.
The single screen's always better if it's on what you want to see.
Yeah. Yes.
It's the same. It's exactly the same clay as Parian porcelain. Yeah, yeah. It's just quite nice. I mean, it means I've got the same firing cycles and I've got the same clay and not more proliferating buckets of reclaim and things like that. And it's actually quite nice to work and to carve with, and also, again, I'm using it unglazed. So this has got I'll have this in my space and you come and feel it. It's got a lovely finish. It's designed to be unglazed and have a sort of natural, nice surface finish. So that is, and I do also sometimes polish them after firing with diamond, and then it's really gorgeous.
Is it
yes, just one firing, yeah. Well, yeah. No, not actually, no. So, I mean, the stages of making this carved bit are what I'm doing now at sort of leather hard stage. And I don't know, I'll hold this in front of the camera, you might be able to see the detail of it. I don't know if that's going to come up on screen, that you can see the detail of that. So it's got a kind of slightly faceted thing. That's about as good as I can get by hand with a knife at leather hard stage. This has now been biscuit fired. And once it's biscuit fired, I've got one here that is biscuit fired, that is soaking. And then either with wet and dry or with these diamond abrasives, you can really quite quickly get an amazing sharp finish on biscuit fired clay. Obviously it's soaking, so there's no dust.
What temperature do you fire your biscuit, and then what temperature do you fire your gloss? Or
990, I think. I don't know why I don't fire it to around 1,000, but for some reason I stopped at 990. And this is, again, fired to 1220.
1220.
Yeah. These two things are fused together in the kiln. This I buy, the Parian I buy from, sorry. The question was...
Is it your own Parian recipe, or do you buy it?
Parian I buy from Valentine's. Little plug for Valentine's in a bag. And this component, there's a sort of start of a component like that here, which is literally just a rectangle of clay. It's Parian blended with a feldspar to make it melt at the same point. So I'm literally just using, harp and slats like you can see here to make it as square as possible. But also those, again, I biscuit fire sometimes, so I can then, after biscuit, grind it to a really sharp edge. So this bit went into the kiln as sharp-edged as that.
When you said it's blended with feldspar, do you blend that yourself?
Yeah, I mix it up, yeah.
In the plastic, you wedge it into the plastic?
No, what I use, luckily the byproduct of my lathe turning is Parian shavings, which slake down. Then you can mix those, so they're like a glaze ingredient.
Okay, so it becomes...
So it's all a recycling operation,
You're
really.
mixing a glaze, aren't you? I think, yeah.
No. I'm going to have the big question, and I'll come back to you. So, hello. Louise, would you like to just talk a little bit about what you're applying?
Yeah, I'm going to demonstrate two different ways that I use the slip. This is just a white slip, and I do use different coloured slips, but actually white is the one I use the most, which I make myself. And so I'm doing slip that is painted on. So with this anteater, I've just painted on. I don't want it to be particularly perfect. And then a little bit later in the demonstration, when the slip has dried a bit, I will incise into it. And here, this box that the lion will sit on, I've made this pattern, which you have to make on the clay when the clay is damp before I put the box together. So I couldn't really demonstrate that. But I don't know where the camera is. It's like one of these wooden presses, but a big one that's, I think, often used with material. So if you can see that you've got the pattern all over the box, and I've painted slip onto it, not onto all of it, just for the demonstration to show you, really. And I've left it so that the slip has now changed colour and it's kind of white. And I'm now going to take that off so that the slip's being used as an inlay, basically. And actually, if I do that on top of newspaper, then it'll be easier to clear up.
And we had a question. It was the same question. Okay, thank you. Nick, we had a question. Is there marble dust in the Parian?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the recipe. I mean, I think it's like a very feldspathic porcelainous clay. I don't actually know what the recipe is. You'd have to go and mug someone in the technical department of Valentine's, probably.
I think most of us buy our clay, and they keep the recipe sort of secret to themselves, don't they?
Yeah.
Because they're all in competition with each other, pot clays and Valentines. Yeah. I suppose the moisture content must be crucial to this carving.
Yeah, so again, similar with the lathe work, I'm trying to get a ball that's an even consistency all the way through. And the reason I've got this one is just I carve a bit rough. I do them in stages, carve a bit, and then let it dry a bit, so I've got a slightly harder surface to work to.
If it was really rock hard, it would be, it'd be like carving a rock, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Are you really good at peeling oranges, Nick?
Possibly, I don't know, actually.
This is like Halima Cassell on a small scale, isn't it?
Yeah.
and more refined, if possible.
That's looking beautiful, Louise. That's looking beautiful.
It's really satisfying the way it comes out. But if you start scraping it back, especially with this very red clay, if you scrape it back when it's too wet, it just it's just ruined. So that's why I had to do this, paint the slip on before this demonstration.
But so much of it, isn't it? It's about knowing exactly the moisture content for Nick and for you, because if you get that wrong,
yes,
you'll lose your pattern, he'll lose his form.
Yeah,
So it's that
exactly.
practice, isn't
yeah.
it?
So like the anteater will go on, it will be fixed to the base,
Yeah.
but then that's the thing of having to get the base to the, we always say leather hard, but one of the visitors said to me, well, it's more like cheese. So if you say it's cheddar, it's good for carving.
Yeah.
And this is more like, it needs to be sort of more Edam.
Edam.
Yes, yes.
Moving towards Parmesan.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. So the question is, if you make a mistake, Nick, and you chip something, can you repair it? Well,
With this, yes, I can, yeah. That's what's nice about carving clay, is you can go both ways. I mean, I quite like working with with a reductive process and taking material away. It's like, in a sense, this is a sort of manual version of lathe turning in some ways. It's got a similarity. But the nice thing is, whereas with a bit of stone, once you've chipped it off, you need to find another bit of stone. With this, you can just stick a bit of clay back in, so you can go to and fro the boundary of the form that you want. You can go in and out, and that's what's one of the exciting things about clay, I guess.
were you drawn to this form, Nick, because of the mind-bogglingly symmetry of a lathe, and you cannot do anything like that?
I don't know, actually. I think these forms are slightly inspired by a wood carver called Alison Crowther, she does things, and just a sort of sense of geometry. I mean, I was really wanting to think of forms which had sharp edges, which would produce an interesting interaction, like here, with the soft material. So, the interesting point of that is this kind of interaction. So I wanted forms with sharp edges, and I thought these bits might be going to be rectilinear, and so I wanted a sort of curvilinear, sharp-edged form. So if you're thinking curvilinear, sharp-edged form, I can hardly speak this morning, then you start to look at things like this, and they're sort of geometric abstractions of things you find in nature a bit as well, some sort of seeds and things like that.
Right, I think that'll do for now, but you can see that the finished piece is also, it depends whether you want a texture or not. So this is now completely flat, so it looks like it's been kind of painted in. And then with a glaze on top, I don't really need any other colour on top of that. The other way of doing it, sometimes I bisque fire it, and then you can, I don't know if you can see, this is very textured from the indentations, and I would put, say, a white underglaze in and then wipe it back, and then you've still got the texture. So it depends on how I want the finished piece to look. And so I'm going to come back to that because that's very wet. Shall I do the Sprig mold?
Yeah, that would be lovely, yeah.
Yeah?
So these are like little woodblock prints from
Yes.
probably Indian woodblock
Those are the
prints.
kind of things I use. I mean, for this, I've got quite a big one. Those great big Indian ones you use. Yeah. I'm going to demonstrate. This is a handy tip, actually, I want to give you. So, with the making of the box, I make it out of slabs, which I've pre-rolled here. I doubt that I'll have time to make the whole box here. I'm always rather over-ambitious when it comes to timing. But what I wanted to show you is that on some of my pieces, I like to have things like, can you see this? It's like a key, a lock, yeah. And that's on my desk at home, and I wanted to use that because I loved the fact that it was so intricate. So I've used paper clay. That stuff Daz or something like that's called? Yes,
Daz,
yeah.
air drying clay.
Yeah,
rather than
air drying
paper
clay.
yeah.
And air drying is so useful because I was able to take an imprint of the lock on my desk and then use this as a sprig mould. And that's another lock. And I've also been out into the woods and taken imprints of bark. I've been down to the sea and taken imprints of the rocks. And then you can just take it away with you, dry it out, and use it as a sprig mould. It won't last forever, but some of them I've then made a plaster mould from the sprig mould. And but it's really great to have it with me because if I like a texture, I can just get an imprint of it.
That's the best use for DAS. I said it's the best use for DAS.
Yes.
It's awful to do anything else.
Oh, you can't. I know, you
Can't
can't.
do anything else with
No,
it.
you can't. So if I'm going to make that and put that into the center of the top of a box, what I would do is roll a piece to the same thickness as this box. And it doesn't need to be nearly that size. So, get that off. Make the imprint. And just roll it on there, make sure it comes out well. Hopefully it has. Yes. And then these handy little cookie cutters, which I use for everything. So I find one that fits like that. And then what I would do at this point, which I can't do now in the demonstration, this is very wet clay, I would let that become leather hard or cheddar cheese so that it was the same consistency as the top of the box, because actually what's going to happen with this is that this clay, the soft clay, is going to shrink a bit more than this one. But for demonstration's sake, I can put this in here. So I don't want to really use coils, but the fact that you use the cookie cutter for both sides means that it should just fit exactly. That's the idea anyway.
That's a very unusual sprigging process. Mostly it's just really on the surface.
Yes, well, if I'm making sprigs like I've got some of plants and leaves,
Yeah.
then I do it very thin on the surface and then attach it.
Yeah.
But I found that with these,
Yeah.
it distorts, and I wanted it to feel like it was a part of the box. So it really depends on what I'm doing. It's these things you kind of pick up as you go along and think, oh, that would be a better way of doing that. And then you don't have to touch the shape at all. So let's hope it all fits in all right. Yeah. And just smooth it with my thumb. That needs a tiny coil around it, actually. But it's good fun making your own sprigs. I can make my own stamps. So for many of the pieces, they have an Extinction Rebellion stamp, which I use as decoration. And people don't notice immediately that's what the sign is. And I don't want it to be immediately obvious.
Yeah. And interestingly, you select animals that are threatened with extinction, and you've said you've got this little Extinction Rebellion stamp on the front, which is really lovely to hear.
Exactly.
How do you select the animals? Because there are so many threatened with
There are
extinction.
so many, aren't there?
How do you make your selection on that basis?
Well, I read about them, and then basically it's the ones that catch my eye that I think I'd be able to make. I mean, there are some animals like the sloth, which I'd love to do, but somehow, it's got to be hanging, hasn't it? So that would be, you can't really put it on wheels. So it does need to lend itself to be going on wheels. And also, I like doing animals that, are quite funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or funny looking.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd be quite offended if they heard me say that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Nick, can I ask you about your inspiration for your designs or your ideas? Where do you find your visual stimulus for this?
Well, the visual stimulus, comes from lots of different places. Partly, they sort of evolve out of thinking about processes and materials. I think I'm always interested. I talked in my talk yesterday about sort of interest in sort of transitions between dimensions, 2 and 3 dimensions, and relationships of line and form. But I've always been interested in the sort of interaction between places and states, the sort of edges of things and boundaries. So I suppose these are, they're about the interaction between 2 different states of material and 2 different places, really.
Solid and liquid.
Yeah, solid and liquid, and things which are also hard and soft, and sort of precision and control, and an accident. These are sort of also, unlike my lathe turn work, engaging with the accidental and the sort of material process. Yeah. I think of them as sort of
tendency to make anything spontaneously, because these look so controlled.
Yeah, but I'm not totally in control of what happens in the kiln, so I think of them as highly constructed kiln accidents.
Okay.
So there's a level of deliberation there, but there's also a level of sort of letting go of it as well. And that's quite interesting to me, because there's then a completely different sort of set of criteria for judging whether it's successful or not. Whereas, technically speaking, the lathe-turned work, I know whether it's good and okay or not, and I don't do seconds, so it just has to be good enough or it goes in the bin. With these, I have to sort of question myself a bit more, and sometimes I have to live with them for a while and look at them and understand what to do. I was explaining to you, Jim, earlier that this piece was set up in the kiln with the rectangle, the precise rectangle of flux material flat on the kiln, a kiln shelf propped up here, leaning on it with this piece sat in a sort of bed of alumina on that, so it's sort of tipping it into it. And this
So was it putting pressure onto it as well?
Yes, I'm sort of I'm using gravity, but I was giving it a nudge with a kiln shelf, shall we say?
Okay.
Yeah. And this melted more than I expected, slightly, and so hit the edge of the kiln shelf, so stuck. So it's got some bits here where it kind of stuck to a kiln shelf and it's broken off. And I've had it in the studio for a while, and I brought it with me here because I don't mind handing it to people to pass around. But I've actually been looking at it more and think that I'm going to grind away all of the bits that are chipped and then find a way of mounting it to a wall. So it'll sit at about this angle as a wall-mounted piece of work, appearing to slightly disappear into the wall.
I think most of us think of ceramics as a malleable material. You seem to take it as something you can work at any stage, including post-firing and...
Yeah, well, I talked about, I talk about this quite a lot, that I think that's one of the really amazing things about the material is that transition that it goes through. And, I think, sort of 90% of working with ceramics is the management of water, in a sense. And that the fact that you can use clay as slip through to all different sorts of levels of plastic material. And we know that, if you're a thrower, plastic is not just one thing. It's also, for different forms, you might want it a little bit wetter or dry. And so that's a whole spectrum. And then leather hard, that I've talked about a bit, is a whole sort of spectrum. And then all the things you can do with things once they're fired and glazed and so on. That's sort of all those transitions are what's really exciting, I think.
I was just thinking that most of us are concerned about the weight, and you don't want it to blow up in the kiln because it's thick, and you poke holes in it and you hollow it out, but you just bypass all of that. You must have a very controlled firing cycle to...
It's not, they're not that big. I mean, partly I don't make these particularly big. So, and I've made quite big work in my career, but I deliberately keep these quite small, partly because I want them to be a little bit playful like that, so that I'm happy with whether they go right or wrong. So, in fact, okay, this is solid, but it's not that thick a section to fire.
Okay.
It's kind of okay. I mean, I'm not firing it particularly slowly. I can't remember, off the top of my head, I'm probably firing this at 70 degrees an hour to 600 and 150 there up. So it's, pretty standard firing.
Right.
I'll make sure it's really dry before it goes in.
Yes, that's not a bad plan. Okay.
So, Louise, would you tell us what you're making?
Yeah, well, I did demonstrate the different techniques I use yesterday, but I thought for those of you that weren't here, and also to show, so this is the lion in progress, and I make the body by making a sausage and putting a dowel through it. The clay's rather wet, actually, so it's not holding its shape very well. I would normally then let it dry out a little bit more, so it does. Or I'd put in a cardboard insert, like something from a kitchen roll. But anyway, it's basically rolling it from the inside. It could be done with a slab, but the great thing about rolling it from the inside is that you don't get any joins. But you do have to, I have to keep changing it around, because even if you think you're using equal pressure on both hands, you're not normally. So that's not gone a bit triangular, but you get the idea of how it's going to be made. I don't want a triangular body. I think it needs to just firm up a bit. So that would be the body, anyway. And as I said before, I tend to draw things roughly to the size I want to make it, and that helps me keep to the dimensions. And then I would cut out a round piece, fix both ends, and the head is a thumb pot. I've opened it up using a dowel because I find that easier. If the clay is quite hard, it also saves my thumbs. So I pinch that out. I'm not going to put the whole thing together here. I'm just showing in parts so you can see how it's made. And the legs, similarly, are done by putting a dowel in and making them hollow.
And Louise, we were just talking before we started that, about kind of sustainable or ethical choices. And you said there's certain materials you choose not to use. Could you just expand a little bit on that?
Yes. Things like tin,
Yeah.
because there is such a history of children mining tin. Cobalt is another one. But much to my relief, I did find that pottery clays are excellent at pot clays, are excellent at looking at the sources of all their materials.
Yeah.
I mean, I expect the other companies are as well, but I just know that pot clays are, which is very helpful.
I think the cobalt one is a really fascinating one because 90% of it comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they have, sadly, a policy that where rare earth minerals are found, then any laws of child labour are allowed to be ignored.
Yes.
So, but there's a thing called the Cobalt Alliance, which ensures the ethical production of cobalt. So if you are using cobalt, I would always kind of ensure, not just in your ceramics, but in the, you're all sitting here, I figured there's probably 2 kg of cobalt in this auditorium, just in the batteries on your mobile phones. So just make sure that you're getting your cobalt from an ethical source.
And then just on a small scale, and it's also more economical, is that I think everybody does, recycle my clay. So actually I get, and as all my forms are hollow and not that thick, I get an awful lot out of a bag of clay. It makes it 5 or 6 pieces out of one bag of clay. And I have an electric kiln, which is quite modern, so it's well insulated, and I can't say I do necessarily more than that.
It's economical and environmental,
yes,
isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, I'm just going to have to put this aside. The clay's so wet, it's hard to put it together. But you get the idea. These are how the different forms are put together, and then they're refined as I go along. I think I will do the decoration of the lion.
We've got
Next.
12 minutes left.
Okay,
Oh, wow.
jolly good.
Is that Nick? 12
Time flies.
Yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Right, first, I will just make the face, again using my trusted.
You love your cookie cutter.
I do love my cookie cutters.
You're all going to be buying cookie cutters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what Ingrid was just saying, yeah.
And talking of
Could do, yeah.
childish things, to get the texture on here, I use these, and any of you who've got children or grandchildren will know that they come in packs with Play-Doh. Very useful. So I want to make his little face.
We've had quite a few references to Play-Doh on the demonstration stage.
Yes.
I think we're all just trying to hold on to our childhood.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just going to put a little nose on, which is quite. I want to see if I'm. Yeah.
It's amazing how that little nose just transforms it. Starts coming alive.
Yeah. And then, I do the eyes and the nose quite simply. Oops. Good, I thought that was the tail that come off.
A couple of your pieces, Dick, have color added to them.
I haven't got any here, but I do. I mean, we're looking at just a white piece here. Yeah. One of the things that this body of work opens up is the potential for different sort of color experiment, which is something I've only really scratched the surface of so far. But I've done some things where the block of sort of fluxed material has been colored, so it's and I can show people pictures of this if they want to come. look on the in my makerspace. So obviously you can stain and colour this clay, and sometimes once you've carved it, you can also apply it. I've had done a couple of things with applying like a velvet underglaze to that as well. Ooh. But with this, I've just been making it a sort of block of coloured melty stuff really. So I've been blending Parian, flux, and stain or cobalt, which I've had so long I don't know where it came from. I've had it for 20 years. So that's there's something quite lush and quite interesting about a sort of dense formed block of a material that's a bit mysterious because it's in between a clay and a glaze, and it's a sort of molten, it's got a slightly sort of waxy, plasticky quality to it, and when they're brightly coloured, they're a bit sort of, again, a bit mysterious. It's not immediately obvious what the material is. And I've done some pieces also where I've made the fluxed element and formed it, literally just sort of kiln formed it over a right angle of kiln shelf. And then which has had enough backwash and alumina on it that it won't stick. So I've just taken a really sharp rectangle, bent it in a kiln, and then attached it to a piece of blackened oak, a wedge of blackened oak, and that's a wall-mounted piece. So you've got this kind of fluxed ceramic on oak, and I quite like that sort of material combination.
Do you ever? How do you attach the pieces to each other?
This is kiln fused.
Melted in.
Kiln fused with the ceramic onto oak.
But other pieces you might use are to
glue. Yeah.
Just aerolite or something, or something more
I used
polished.
a Gorilla Glue or something. Yeah. I think is it a Gorilla Glue? It was a slightly sort of expanded.
Oh, Gorilla Glue. Oh, yeah, that fills all the gaps.
Yeah. I used slightly too much when it bulged at the edges, and then I had to spend ages with a scalpel.
Right, you can carve it too.
Carving the glue, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is dust a concern for you? The older I get, the more aware I am of my lungs.
Yeah, I mean, it is. We were talking yesterday when I work at the lathe. I wear a mask a lot in the studio.
Okay.
I mean, doing this, I'd also quite often be working above a bucket or something, so I'm just dropping clay into water, and then, I'm probably getting to the stage where I'm not really making fine dust here, but I'll be sponging it back and then working at it. So I'm kind of, quite often then, and it helps actually with refining the form. You can see that what I've been doing here is having changed tool to just a riffler, sort of serrated edge, which is, serrated edge is very nice for cutting through and making a curve or a profile you want, and then I can come back into that and actually just, sponge
I was pleased to see you thumb a little extra clay into it.
Yeah, I did. You noticed. Yeah. I did. A block fell out,
normal.
Didn't it? And, yeah.
I mean, carving seems so, not unclay-like. Maybe that's not fair, but it seems a contradiction in turn for those of us that throw or, thumb everything into shape or into texture. Somehow just working with it as a resistant material, like a stone carver.
Yeah.
Seems
a bit weird. I don't know. I mean, I sometimes worry that I've just spent my whole career kind of fighting clay and doing things with it which it's not sort of known for or natural to do. But I sort of think in the end it's I'm just exploring the different possibilities of the different ways you can work with it. I think if people saw the talk, the first images I had in the talk yesterday had some pieces which looked more like concrete, and I was actually consciously trying to make something that was ceramic, but that didn't look ceramic. And maybe there's some of that sort of material dissonance going on with quite a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting to see this range of liquid to solid to molten material. And David Benz is mixing all sorts of stuff, including glass and aggregates and things. And then there's a lot of time spent grinding things down.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to take these other processes and see where they can lead to alternative surfaces and alternative forms. So, like kiln firing it into shape over propped up shelves and things.
Yeah. I mean, some of it comes from being in the ceramics and glass department at the Royal College.
Yes.
Where they've got all that cold working going on. So that, and ceramics and glass are quite interesting bedfellows because they're sort of chemically quite similar, but technically, in lots of ways in their making, miles apart.
Sorry, we've got a couple of questions, Jerry. Do you do much nerdy testing?
A certain amount, Yeah, I mean, I actually find glaze testing really boring. I don't know if I should confess that on stage here. So I try and limit it, but I do end up doing some. I mean, you know, this is the result of doing a line blend of a feldspar into Parian, and it's actually quite a simple blend. So that's quite simple. But once you start adding colour, then you've got to adjust that again. So, you know, I have got quite a lot of cubes of different material that were precise cubes fired.
Nick, I know you, and I know you do a lot of nerdy testing. It's all relative. I would say the answer is yes.
Yeah.
We have another question? Yep, Louise is working on her main with another lovely hole cutter tool, I see. Is it a different clay or is it a stained clay? Because we can see the obviously colour difference.
It's paper clay. It's terracotta paper clay. Because I like it to be really thin for the main, and it's really easy to add. I've done the same with the tail. So the tail is just a coil, and I've literally used this hole cutter to get the right shapes. And so you can see that they're quite easy to apply. And obviously I won't be able to do the whole main here, but then once it's done, I can then move the shapes a bit so they've got a bit more life. So I kind of go through it and move them around. And in my studio, I'd take quite a long time doing them, but it also means that, I just like the thinness of it, really. So it works quite well, and I roll it out between materials so I can get it really thin, which is why I brought that. And then when I decorate it, how long have we got?
3 minutes.
Okay, I'm not going to decorate it. But I just wanted to tell you that what I do is put on different underglazes. I wouldn't put slip on this. And so I would start with a yellow underglaze on all of this, done with brushes like this, so that it doesn't go on too thick. And then I'd put a bit of red, a bit of orange, and when I do the glaze, I'd wipe it back at the edges so that you've got some variation. It's not all just one colour. And as I've only got 3 minutes, this is still a bit wet, but the other thing I wanted to show you, he needs to be on his board, really. This only takes a second, and it's very satisfying. So I've got the shape, and I made a complete mess with my red hands. So then you wash your hands, and you make sure it's all nice and clean. You're not messing it up.
We learn from mistakes.
Yes. And then with various tools, I do like the metal tools, I make all the shapes I want for the tail and just etch through it. So you can see. I'm not very precise. I tend to do things quite spontaneously. I might do it kind of much more patterned sometimes, but for the sake of this demonstration.
It's such a joy to be able to see this being made and then go straight upstairs and see a beautiful finished one, isn't it? Oh, yes? So what is the difference between taking the slip back with a knife and as opposed to wiping it off with a cloth?
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't wipe it off with a cloth because if you're scraping off the top layer so that it's staying in the indents, staying in the pattern, right? So if you do that, you can see it's coming out quite well. If you try and wipe it off with a cloth, that's what happens. The pattern disappears, and it just goes all mucky. Yeah. So I'd keep it dry.
Keep it very dry.
I think that's...
We've got one last question, the man in red.
With regards to your beautiful shapes,
Mm-hmm.
I know how long it takes to make them, but I'm a great believer
So the question was, I'm going to surmise it very quickly. Have you ever thought about making molds of them so you can supply them in greater number at lower cost?
I've thought about making molds of them, probably not for that reason. They are moldable forms. I do quite like that sort of positive negative flip of mold making. I suppose I do make series of shapes, but I quite like the fact that each one is handmade and is individual, even if it's a repetition of the same thing. So I suppose I'm choosing to work in partly to operate in a market where I'm making one-off things in series, but actually they're unique. That sort of tension actually between the kind of the repetition and the uniqueness is quite important to me, and that's important in the lathe-turned work as well, that I might make a series of things which could be pretty much identical, but they're all handmade, and that I find that's quite exciting to me, pushing sort of skill to that level. And yeah, I mean, inherently it means they're relatively small in number and relatively expensive, and I suppose that's a way I've chosen to operate in the market, yeah.
So it's a deliberate choice to keep them as personalized.
It is. It's a deliberate choice to keep them as sort of
cast.
small-scale pieces of sculpture and not to mass produce them. But I mean, to some extent, it's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me to make lots of them, so I've never really, if someone did, then I might go, oh yeah, great, I'll make a mold and knock them out. I don't quite know, but I quite like the sort of the individuality and the uniqueness of the object. Yeah.
I'm sneaking in one last question and then we're done. It's a question for you, Louise. Somebody would like to know what's the final glaze you're going to put on that?
Yeah, good question. So after the slip, I don't always use slip, I bisque fire, and then would use underglazes, and then I use something called a sparkly lithium glaze, and which is whiting, potash feldspar, china clay, and lithium carbonate, and that fires to 1220. And it's a bit temperamental. If you put it on too thick, it looks really browny, rusty, but I want it to create the idea that it's been old and been dug up. So it needs a little bit of rust, but not too much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, and let's show our appreciation.
Thank you.
Nick and Louise.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just a couple of very important announcements for you who are keen to get to those kilns. Joe Finch kiln sale will be starting at 11:30 a.m.